My guest today's got a special story, and let me tell you why I brought him on board. This is a man who, in 2 years, figuring out ways how to fraud the bank. He made $11.5 million. Eventually, he was on America's Most Wanted list, Secret Service specifically. FBI was after him. 3 years, they couldn't catch him. Eventually, they caught him in 2006. 2007, he got 26 years. He just got out 6-7 months ago, July of 2019. And he's got a book out called Shark in the Housing Pool, on the run with the Secret Service's Most Wanted list. Having said that, my guest today, Matthew Cox. Matthew, thanks for coming out.
Sure, no problem.
So this is you got a crazy story here, man. What's the story with you learning how to go up against the banks and make $11.5 million in 2 years, and some say 40 million, some say other numbers. So how did you even get into this business?
See, how did I get into business? I graduated USF with a degree in fine arts, which is essentially, I don't want to say useless, but I couldn't make any real money doing that. I have a learning disability. I actually tried my hand at being an insurance adjuster, got my 220 property casualty license in Florida, became an insurance adjuster, was laid off twice. That industry was not working for me. I had a girlfriend that had gotten a job working for a subprime lender, and she said, you're made for this. You've got to do this. You absolutely would be phenomenal at this. And the nice thing was all the paperwork was done by the processor. So all I really had to do was get clients, bring them in, structure the deal, and most of the paperwork was processed by the processor. So it worked really well. Like the first month, I think I closed like a couple of loans. Next month was like 4 loans, then it was 6, then it was 8, then it was 10, then they made me a branch manager. Eventually, within a year or so, I opened my own mortgage company.
So you left them, and
I left them.
Who were you with at first?
It was Eagle Lending. It was
Eagle Lending.
Yeah, well, they went under.
Yeah. Well, a lot of them did.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Some of them you remember, there was big names that you would remember.
Yeah.
So Eagle Lending, this is in Florida.
Well, this was in Florida, but they were in several states.
Got it. Okay. And so a year later, you decide to start your own deal.
Right.
And what happens next?
I hired a bunch of brokers. I had probably a dozen guys working there. And the problem was at Eagle, essentially at Eagle Lending, really the first loan I ever did, everything looked great except for one piece of paper, which was a verification of rent. My client or my borrower had a 30-day late. My manager told me, get rid of the 30-day late, you got a loan, you'll make $3,500. If you send this to underwriting the way it is, you're done. So she actually pulled out a bottle of whiteout and gave it to me, said, white it out, make a copy. So I made a copy. I'd never done anything wrong before. Made a copy, sent it in, sweated bullets for 4 or 5 days, went through underwriting, everything's great, loan closed, I got a check for $3,500. It emboldened me, and the next guy, if he had made $55,000, he's going to get a loan, but he made 45. So if that 4 became a 5, we've got a loan. Well, I changed the W-2.
You still did that over there, or you started doing it
I started doing it at Eagle.
Oh, at Eagle.
At Eagle, but then when I started my own place, it just ramped up, and before you know it, all the guys working for me are doing fraudulent loans, and we just became a mill. I'm not saying all the loans were fraudulent, but a good portion of the loans were fraudulent loans.
When you were doing it at your place.
And
Can I ask you a question about Eagle?
Sure.
When you were there, let me ask you this, because sometimes in the world, I was in LA. And
Right.
when I was in LA, Countrywide, New Century, you remember these guys?
Yeah.
Guys are making $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 per month is what they're making. And it's no income, no assets, creative financing, don't worry about it. Everyone's got a 720, 740, all this other stuff. Some of the guys that did it right came from a place that taught the right habits. Some of the guys that picked up the bad habits came from a place that was very normal to have the bad habits. Would you say you picked up some of those bad habits from being at Eagle, or even prior to that, you kind of figured out some creative ways to make money, even as a kid in high school or coming out of high school?
Yeah, I know. I really didn't. It was definitely at Eagle, and it started with the manager of the store, and she was making money. She was closing loans. I was desperate to make money. I was desperate not to end up living in my parents' spare room. And and I just slowly, it just started creeping up on me. Before you knew it, it was just all consuming. I mean, and look, I enjoyed it. The fact of the matter is that, getting over on somebody on the banking industry, on an underwriter, and kind of faking them out or something, there's a certain, I guess, perverse pleasure in that. You feel good, you feel smart, you feel sharp, like, wow, I really did something. The loan closes, you make a chunk of money, and it just got bigger and bigger, expanded from there. And of course, my brokers are all doing it now, and there's so many people in the industry. Subprime was so corrupt at the time. Even when we got caught, and we got caught all the time. I got caught with a couple $1 million from a bank one time. Talked to the guy. It was Pinnacle Bank Corp out of Chicago. Talked to the owner. He called me up. He's like, look, clearly this is fraud. We pulled all these files. We got a couple $1 million. They'd already sold $1 million to Household Bank. And I'm sitting there saying, look, if you're trying to tell me that you want me to buy back $2 million, that's not going to happen. So we need to come up with another solution here. And he goes, okay, well, nobody wants the FBI digging through their files. He goes, so if we're going to go ahead and sell this $1 million to Household in a sale next week. So if any of them come back on us, just promise you'll help us get rid of them. And I was like, of course. The likelihood that they were going to catch that fraud 2 months or 3 months later was very unlikely. So of course that sold. And I mean, I got caught multiple times. Eventually, eventually a broker that had worked for me got caught and committing fraud. And she and her husband wore a wire on me because they knew I had been doing fraud, and they got me to admit things on tape. And so the FBI came in, they said, look, we're going to indict you. And so they indicted me. Well, I waived the indictment. It doesn't matter. Essentially they said, you plead guilty to this fraud and you lose your mortgage company. And so I said, okay. I mean, by that point, I think when the FBI came in, which was at a later time, they said that the mortgage company, they estimated it had done like $40 million in bad loans over the course of like 2 or 3 years. But that doesn't mean that that's loss. It just means that you got a $200,000 loan that you shouldn't have gotten. Mm-hmm. And they're saying that's a bad loan. That's $200,000 in bad loans. Well, you made the payments, or maybe you didn't, I don't know. But they estimate around $40 million. So at that point, I should have claimed bankruptcy, should have moved in with mom and dad, but I've got bills. I don't want to take a step back, so I decided to go ahead and escalate the fraud, and I decided to start flipping houses in an area of Tampa known as Ybor City, Tampa Heights area. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
It's a nice area.
Yes, at the time, it was rough. It was rough. I mean, the median house in that area was probably worth $50,000 to $60,000. Got it. So I go in and I start buying up houses. The problem with buying those houses is that the people that live in those areas don't have good credit. They don't have their down payments. They quit their job a week before the loan closes, and so you're struggling against your buyers. So what I decided was that if I could get around the buyer somehow to borrow the money against the houses, which meant I had to start creating the buyers. So I started creating my own buyers and creating synthetic identities, and I figured out how to get Social Security to issue Social Security numbers to people that didn't exist. And
that's pretty creative right there.
Yeah, it was. I want to say it was difficult, but it was really a lot of phone calls, and then it was just coming up with the documents, and it was complicated, but it wasn't. Once I got the system down, it wasn't that hard. Social Security will issue a Social Security number to a child under the age of 12 months old, without the child being present. So all you have to do as the parent is show up with the birth certificate and the shot record. And you say, my child was born, I never got a Social Security number issued, and they'll issue a Social Security number to a child who's 10 months old without seeing the child. And of course I would go in using a fake ID. And they would check the computer and they'd go, you're right. This child exists, but we don't have a Social Security number for him. We will issue the Social Security number and they mail it to you. So then I would go with that Social Security number, I would then order 3 secured credit cards, make the payments for 6 months, and suddenly I have 690 credit scores, 650, 710 credit scores. So I've got this perfect synthetic individual that can now buy my houses for 40 grand. So I'm buying a house for 40 grand. The problem is I would clean it up a little bit, and even if I sold it at top dollar for 60 or 70, I'm making 30 grand, 25 grand. That's not worth it. So the issue is you need to borrow more. I needed to borrow more money in this synthetic individual name. So I need to get the houses to appraise higher. So I was dating a girl at a title company, and she explained to me how sales were recorded. And of course, do you know anything about appraisals? You probably know.
Which part?
Well, like to appraise a house.
Yeah, of course I know what. Yeah,
Right.
sure.
You need an appraisal. Well,
Yes.
the way they gauge the value of the home is they look and they find 3 other comparable sales in the area within 1 mile that have sold within 1 year. And so what I did was I said, okay, well, if I'm trying to sell this house for $150,000, I can't get an appraisal unless I can find comparable sales. And she explained that, look, if you pay the extra doc stamps on the sale, those recordings will not go for, they won't record it at 50, they'll record it at 150 or 200. If you pay an extra $700, it adds 100,000 to it. So now I'm buying houses for 50 and I'm recording the value at 150 or 200. And I'm doing it all over the place in the name of synthetic individuals don't exist. And this was the dumbest part, is that I'm naming these guys James Red, Brandon Green, Michael White, Lee Black.
Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, Reservoir Dogs. Just, I mean, and I thought I was so clever. I really did. You know, you always think you're clever until the judge is looking at you going, you know, what are you doing? You just suddenly you realize, okay, that was a jackass move. My bad. But so I've got all these houses, and each guy's buying, he's buying 5 houses. We're recording the values for 150 to 200,000. The appraisers, the banks are, I'm ordering an appraisal from a bank. Countrywide's coming in and saying, their own appraiser's coming out, and they're looking at it, they're going, yeah, it's worth 200,000. There's a comp 2 blocks away here, 3 blocks over here. They don't realize I own all those comps in various names. I'm creating the market.
Can I go back on the title when you said you pay $700 a little bit more, the comps are going to favor you? Who helps benefit the comps for you? Is there somebody that puts bigger numbers? Who is that person?
Well, what happens is I buy your house for $50,000.
Okay.
And I close obviously at a title company that I know the person. And then I either would say I want a construction credit for $100,000 added to this $50,000 sale. So now they would say, well, that would make the sale $150,000. Matt, it's going to cost you an extra $700 in taxes. And I would say, that's fine, I'll pay the extra $700. Because it's .007 for every 100,000, $700.
So okay, so it's nothing that the title rep is doing that's fraudulent.
No.
You just think it's going to cost another $100,000 on construction loan, 0.7%, $700. It's a $150,000 house, not a $50,000 house.
Or even if I bought it from you for 50, and I explain to the title company, let me record it. I'll bring it down there and record it. And they go, if they know me, they're like, okay, well, why? Well, I want to get a copy of the recorded deed. Oh, okay, no problem, Matt. I go down, I fill out the paper, I change the paperwork right then. I just add a check for $700. I record, and I go to the clerk. Here you go. They go, okay, 150. Or oh, okay, it's 200. You added an extra $900. Jumps up almost 100. Instead of 100,000, 140,000 plus the 50. Now it's 190. So I'm doing that, and so the whole market shoots up through the roof. It goes from like the median price of 60,000 to like 190 to 200. I think by the time I was done, they said it was at 250. So, but all these guys are buying 5 houses. So James Red owns 5 houses worth 200,000 apiece that he bought for. He's got 200,000 in. I'm borrowing $1 million on these houses. So I'm borrowing $1 million on houses that I've got maybe $250 and another $100,000 to clean up a little bit. I'm making $600,000 or $700,000 for each one of these guys.